Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome. Thank you so much for taking time out to be here. It's neat to see people continuing to come on. Please come on in and join us. And also, we'd like to extend a welcome to all the folks out there joining us through, I believe it's Facebook Live. For those that haven't yet had the pleasure of meeting, my name is Manny Valenzuela. I'm the superintendent here in Sahuarita Unified School District. And I say it with all sincerity, thank you for taking time. I think this community engagement exemplifies kind of the culture and the spirit of community that we're trying to build here. And these community conversations are an example of that. Hopefully you've seen an increased number of these, and that's a tradition and a practice that we hope to just continue and to maintain and to continue to grow. And again, the goals of these conversations are pretty basic. We want to, of course, brag and share the successes that we're having, but we also want to talk about current issues, and if there's issues that need to be addressed or any concerns, address those. And perhaps one of the most important aspects of these meetings is the opportunity for people, either in person or through your questions online, to give us your input, to ask your questions, and to have a dialogue as a community. I have the picture on the I almost said overhead because that's when I started teaching, on the screen, because the saying says a picture is really worth 1,000 words. I had the pleasure last evening of attending, maybe some of you did as well, the District Choral Festival. And the reason that it struck a particular chord with me, pardon the pun, is because it exemplifies the importance of these programs and these programs that are supported by our community. I remember the choral director, a member of our faculty from Walden Grove, Mr. Ben Lebovitz, stood up, and some of his words stuck with me from last night. He said that when we started doing these choral festivals, showcasing our chorus programs from different schools, that he could put them all on one of those risers that they would fit on the stage. And at the end, when they did this grand finale and they brought everybody on the stage, there were over 300 students. And I think that speaks to one thing, and that's that community support. It's the only way that happens. School programs are being cut nationwide, and certainly in our state, it's something that is of constant attention, is the funding issue regarding public education. And we're so fortunate that we have fine arts programs, including choral music, instrumental band, orchestra. We have it from K through 12. And I believe one of the primary reasons for that is all of you, is the sacrifice that you make, the support that you make, how you express yourself by voting yes, and really expressing that investment and that support of our programs so that we're able to deliver these programs. Those 300 kids did not just drop out of the sky. It really is a team effort and a community effort, and we believe that that's how education goes here in Sahuarita. So I just want to say thank you for that. And along with the fact that we had 300 kids on the stage last night is another representation, another example of the fact that we are continuing to grow. And thoughtful growth is a good thing. It's a sign that this is a community, and that this is a community where people want to be and hopefully raise families and live and grow businesses and just thrive in overall quality of life. But with that comes the challenges of adapting to that growth. And again, I say thank you for your support in regards to our current bond project, which is the only reason that we're talking this evening. Our topic of conversation is the boundaries related to our new K-8 school, which is currently full speed under construction at the new school site. And that also is under construction due to the investment, the sacrifice, and the commitment of our community. So again, we say thank you with the utmost sincerity. And while I'm saying thank yous, and before I turn over the mic to my colleague, Mr. Downs, I'd like to say thank you to the governing board team here from Sahuarita School District. I'm blessed to work with a great governing team that makes big decisions about these directions that we take. And we have, I believe we have 3 of them here this evening. We have a quorum, but this is a posted event, so we're okay. First of all, we have our board, I believe it's board clerk this year, Mr. Tom Murphy, who also works as our mayor. Tom's here in the front. Next to Tom on the same row here is Mrs. Sherry Lowell, member of the board. And way in the back, Ms. Dahlia Zimmerman, another member of our board. Thank you all for being here. And again, this evening, we said we're going to talk about current issues, issues that are important, that affect our community, and that we want to share with you and give input to. And Mr. Downs has been doing a very nice job of leading a group of community members, diverse community members, making important decisions. Well, the decisions haven't been made yet, and I want to stress that. We're here to discuss and to provide an update on where this committee is in really a very thorough and very comprehensive and very meticulous task of looking at a complex thing, which is to make decisions about the boundaries where students will attend. And we're doing it with careful thought. And to give you the latest chapter of that thought process, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Assistant Superintendent Scott Downs. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Valenzuela. I want to thank everyone who came here today and our Facebook friends who are joining us live via that avenue. Being in charge of the boundary committee is an interesting endeavor. The first thing I told all 10 members of our committee was, no matter what we do, somebody won't be happy. And I know whatever recommendation we give to the governing board, no matter what decision they make, somebody won't be happy. It's our common theme is everyone always says, well, I don't want large class sizes, but don't move my kid. And we realize that, and we realize any neighborhood that we look or any aspect that we start to uncover, we know that it impacts kids. So we take that situation very seriously. We look at the pros, we look at the cons, and we've been meeting for a while talking about this process. So tonight I just want to talk about some of the things that we're going to be going about. Sometimes I think the most important thing on this slide is the red line on the bottom. It says the journey is just as important as the destination. If I was just to tell you what our recommendation is, I think there would be a lot more questions because there's a reason we got to that final destination. And so I'm going to kind of take you through some historical facts of what we know to be and kind of how we got to where we are. So I'm going to go through current boundaries, historical process, the current feeder school pattern, meaning which school feeds into the next school. I'm just talk quickly about our committee selection, some of the guiding principles that they selected, the journey of the consolidated proposals, the plans, quickly the staff requirements, and then we'll take some questions and suggestions at the end. So the current boundaries, and again, this is going to be important to understand later. So if we were to just look, and there's no streets there, and I apologize, but that blue, somewhat of a square rectangle, is the Copper View. That's a kindergarten through fifth grade school. If we were to look at Anza Trail, that's the green. And what's important to notice about that slide is that Copper View feeds into Anza. So just as a note, anybody inside the blue square, K5 goes to Copper View, and 6th through 8th grade goes to Anza. Anybody who's just in the green is K8 Anza, and that's very important to remember in just a little bit, which I'll bring up in a second. And then the main campus, we have the primary school, intermediate school, and middle school, also the high school. Is the blue area, the north part of Rancho Cerrita. And one thing I want to talk about just quickly, which is kind of a side tangent, is everyone always says, I don't understand the current boundaries because I live in the northern part of Rancho and I drive right past a school to get to the main campus. I don't understand why they did that. And the reason that we did that many years ago was if we were to take every student and they went to the closest school that they lived at, everybody would go to Anza, and they just can't hold everybody. So we took the biggest circle that we could put around Anza, and those are the kids who go to Anza. and that's why it left the northern part of Rancho Cerrito that comes to the main campus. This is just the current tracking system. I call it the main campus track and the off-campus track, but we have the main campus here that you're sitting at today, SPS to SIS, middle school to SHS. SOPRI, which is in Amado, Arizona, also feeds into the middle school. Then we have the off-campus track, Copperview, which I already said feeds into Anza, which goes to Walden Grove High School. The red line that you see before you is our current district boundary. Inside our district boundary, those are the schools that currently exist. Actually, Walden Grove is a little bit closer than that, but the red dots are existing schools. The yellow, the green dot is where the new school is going to be approximately. And where do the majority of our students live? And this was important for our committee when we started to analyze what we were going to do. Although we have students not in those two circles, but the main flux of students come from either Rancho Cerrito, that green oval, or the La Cañada area, which is the blue oval. What schools do they attend? Kind of saw that with the existing boundaries that I already showed. And I'm going to show you in just a second, when we were talking about the new school, our committee quickly realized that it doesn't make sense to have kids in the green oval and ship them down to a school in the blue oval and take kids from the blue oval and put them into schools into the green oval. That was just kind of the mix. So quickly, our committee started to focus on the La Cañada area, which I'll show you in just a second. But before I do that, just want to talk about current new growth, because we don't want to build a school and already have it max capacity and then have to deal with other neighborhoods that are, still growing, and now we have an overcrowded school. So just quickly, we have right behind Safari Park, we have Entrada del Rio. Rancho Cerrito has already graded that area. With the ratio that we have that we studied, we know about how many students are produced out of each home. There's going to be 514 homes there, which produces 216 K-8, 74 high school students. And then we have just east of Cerrito High School, Entrada La Villita, which is a total of 71 homes. And you can see the students that will typically be produced out of there is 27 K-8, 13 high school kids. And again, that changes based on the type of house. We also have just south of Animax Park, Santa Cruz Meadows, that will be eventually 238 homes, which will produce 92 K-8 students and 48 high school students. And again, if our new school entails that area, we'll probably want to make sure that we eventually have room for those 92 kids, because again, we don't want to build a school that's already at max capacity. One more area, and Rancho Cerrito has articulated this to us, that at some point just south of the new school, and they said sometime in the next 5 years, that means it could be a year, it means it could be 3 years or 5 years. They said approximately 200 homes. That's not a big deal because it only produces about 78 K-8 students, but again, we'll want to keep that in mind when we look at the new school, since it'll be right next to the new school. The boundary process, just so you kind of know what we're doing, is we have a committee initiation and we're starting to analyze things. Then the reason it's in red is kind of where we are now. We get feedback through forums and our website, and I'll give you that website at the end of the presentation. At the very end, we'll give a recommendation to Dr. Valenzuela, who will in turn approve that recommendation and present it to the governing board. The presentation to the board, and we don't want to rush this, will probably be January of 2018. Because we want to make sure that we get all the input necessary for the board to make an educated decision and that they hear the public. Just so you know, here's the committee. It consisted of about 15 people. I'm happy to say that we had a parent from every K-8 school. Also, the director of transportation was on there because that's a major component of determining boundaries and travel times. So it was a very extensive committee. This was the timeline we initiated on September 13th. All the committee meetings are in red. Public forums are in blue, and you can see the little star of where we are right now. We will get more feedback after today and meet as a committee at some point, and then give a recommendation to Dr. Valenzuela. If we think we need another public forum, we can certainly put another one in. This is not written in stone. Again, we want to make sure that we leave no rock unturned and get to hear back from everybody. The first thing we did at the first committee was our committee decided what was going to be our guiding principles, what was important to us, what did we think was important to the community. And these were the 6 things that the committee came up with, and I'm not going to read all 6 of them because you can read them there. But what we noticed as soon as we started this process, that some of the guiding principles were in conflict with each other. Sometimes in order to alleviate students from all of our schools it meant moving more students. So again, it was very difficult to make sure we maintained all of these guiding principles, but these were the things that were important to the committee and what we always came back to. What are we here for? We're here for kids. We want to move as few students as possible, minimize bus travel time, maintain a sense of community, et cetera, et cetera. So these were the plans that were developed. We had many turned in, and what I did was I overlapped them on a map. And quickly you can see by just the first 6 that I mapped that our committee kind of came up with a lot of different plans. But if you can see from the left-hand side, which is the La Cañada area, quickly we noticed that that was the area that we needed to focus on. And we did this all independently. Everyone left, did their best maps. I gave them how many students were in each neighborhood so they knew how many kids they would be pulling and moving. It wasn't just let's draw a bunch of circles. On the right-hand side was some ideas on an attempt to alleviate Anza Trail School. There are about 1,350 students. We have students in teacher workrooms, which is working okay. It's not fantastic. They can continue to do that, but we don't have places where teachers can go in their spare time and make photocopies and do everything that they can. And so that's what they came up with. One of the plans that came up with was Jan Bryson from Copperview Elementary Schools, who is here. Thank you, Jan. She had drawn this map on the left, which is actually the final recommendation from the committee, at least right now, to Dr. Valenzuela, and we haven't presented to him yet. But even though it looks kind of goofy and exactly what are the roads, because I've been reading some of the feedback on the website, it's like, well, I don't know where exactly that is because there's no roads. The easiest way to describe the new school on the left-hand side is anything south of Cerrito Road and anything north of Walmart or Duval Mine, everything in between. That's just a drawing that kind of circles all the houses in that area. That produces 683 students that would come off of the main campus and 170 for later, producing a total of 853. The school capacity is about 750, 800. We feel comfortable with 853 with the number of classrooms that we have. The 170 later means those neighborhoods that I showed you that are going to be built out. The one south of Animax Park and the 200 homes for Rancho Cerrito right next to the school. So it would absolutely be 683 warm bodies with a potential of 170 more, producing 853. The drawing on the right was Jan's thought process in alleviating Anza Trail School. And what she did, I don't want to speak for her, but what she did is she took the furthest boundary away from Anza and said, let's have that neighborhood go to the main campus in order to alleviate some of that. Just in that green box, and it was important that I showed you those school boundaries before, because remember, the first slide I showed you is that northern part is Copperview Elementary School, and middle school was Anza. So with that little square, there's 115 kids that would be pulled out of Anza, because again, you don't want to just pull out certain schools and not, you got to treat the whole neighborhood as a consistent entity. So again, you're maintaining those community, the feeling tones, and the kids will go to school together. So quickly we realized that probably wouldn't be possible, because again, it pulls more kids out of Copperview to the main campus than it did out of Anza. It would only pull 69 middle school kids out of Anza. So quickly we realized we can't really look at any of that neighborhood furthest away from Anza in Rancho Cerrito, because it pulls more kids out of Copperview Elementary School. So with staffing, this is me putting on my HR hat now. This is how those numbers would look like in the new school. We never know exactly what happens in kindergarten, so we repeat what happened in kindergarten this year. So with those neighborhoods, again, south of Cerrito Road and north of Duval Mine, we'd have 60 kindergarten kids, because there's 60 now there. Those 60 kids move up to first grade. Right now we have 72 kids in first grade. So again, we moved everybody up one grade level, producing a total of 683. You can't really tell, but the second line is the number of teachers. This is just my HR mind dividing by number that I thought was appropriate. And again, this would be a conversation with our administrative team. And those would be the produced class sizes of 20, 20, 24, 20, 24, 22. I did not do the middle school class size, because the schedule for middle school is quite detailed. You always have a teacher on a planning period, and so I would have to sit down with Mrs. Robinson, the new principal, and kind of look like, what would that look like? How many staff would we need? So I wasn't able to do that. With elementary, it's easy. You take the number of students, divide by the number of teachers you have, and that's your class size. Again, or in the middle there, that's what would be left at the main campus. So if you took those 683 kids out, you'd have the blue line, which would have 460 left at SPS, 461 at Sarita Intermediate School, and 539 at the middle school. And that little box off to the right is a new box that I added. That would be the projected enrollment if the new school didn't open, 652, 682, and 809. And at the bottom is the totality of staff needed. And you can see the current number of teachers that are 12 kindergarten teachers at SPS. We would need 10 if you add the 3 needed at the new school and the 7 that would be needed at the main campus. And so you'd need 2 less kindergarten teachers. If you do that through all grades, at least K through 5, you can see that it's a wash because you would need 3 less teachers in kindergarten and first, and you'd need 3 more teachers, 1 in second and 1 in 4th grade. But again, not really much to do with boundary, but something that we have to start looking at as soon as the boundary process is done. So this is the, and again, this says Mrs. Mary McGraw, and again, completely working independent of each other. She came up with the same exact plan that Jan did, and the committee kind of looked at that was kind of the general consensus of the committee. Again, 683 later, 170, or 683 now, 170 later, 853. One of the endeavors that the committee was looking at was the idea of moving kids to SOPRI. And I'll get your question in just a second. We can't hear me?
You had made a statement about Mrs. Robinson, and there was a concern regarding the statement. You said the new principal, Mrs. Robinson.
Oh, my apologies. Maybe I didn't say the word "and" in between there. What I would have to say is, thank you for clarifying, and if you're on Facebook, I apologize. What I would have to say is when I analyze the middle school portion, I would have to meet with the new school principal and Mrs. Robinson to figure out what the schedules would look at both schools in terms of the middle school portion. So I didn't say the word "and" in between there. So Mrs. Robinson is not the new principal at the K-8 school. We love you at On. So thank you. One of the endeavors that we had talked about was moving some kids to SOPRI to try to get more bang for a buck down at SOPRI. And so that was going to be the little square at the bottom, which is at the southern end of our boundary. I believe that was 120 kids that would have potentially moved to SOPRI, listening to community feedback, listening to some safety concerns. We decided to not embark on that endeavor anymore because we didn't think it was appropriate. So at least our committee is not going to be recommending any of that neighborhood to move. That would remain main campus. So again, the official recommendation would be that yellow line, which again is anything south of Sarita Road and north of Duval Mine. One of our guiding principles too was the alleviation of ONZA. Again, we were looking at 2 neighborhoods under construction. We looked under consideration. We started to look at Sarita Heights, and the Presidio del Cielo came back into the conversation. We had talked about Presidio del Cielo at the very beginning of our process because we thought, well, to alleviate ONZA, we'll take Presidio del Cielo, and if you don't know where that is, it's just north of our main campus. We thought, let's have them come to the main campus, and that neighborhood, Entrada del Rio, which is behind Safari Park, would take its place at ONZA. And we quickly ruled out that the same number of kids are going to be moving out of Presidio del Cielo, and they would be filled up by the same number of kids from Safari Park. So why move all of these kids? Because you're not really alleviating anything at ONZA Trail School. And you'd be moving, 200 kids for no reason whatsoever. So we dropped that. But that idea did come back when we started to look at other options. So those 2 options, this one has already been articulated publicly at a public forum, was if you were to take the Sarita Heights, which is basically everything out east, K-12, if they went to the main campus. That would take 235, which is the number in red in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. K-8 would go to the main campus. And 104, that used to be 120, and I apologize on my previous presentation, that included current high school seniors, and that wouldn't affect them because they're going to graduate this year. So there's 104 9th through 11th graders that would be affected, that if we change this neighborhood to main campus, that K-8 would go to the schools here, but then those Walden Grove High School students would then go to Sarita High School. In talking with Principal Hill, the first thing, I was going to give her some options about maybe we just grandfather those who are going to be juniors and seniors and make the rest moved. And it's not a surprise to me that the first thing that she said was, I'll open enroll every single one of them if they want to remain here. And again, open enrollment is based on the conditions that you qualify. But she said, I don't want to lose any of my kids. I'll take every single one of them back if that's what's going to happen. With open enrollment, there's not transportation unless we were able to do that. Also, with those two neighborhoods, it is our committee's recommendation that Entrada del Rio behind Safari Park in blue and Entrada La Villita, which is east of Cerrito High School, both come to the main campus. And the net changes are all in the upper right-hand corner. The net change to the main campus is the minus 683 that goes to the new school, 235 from the red area, and then the new neighborhoods, Entrada del Rio and main campus, given a net loss to the main campus of 206. The net change for the new school would ultimately be the 853, and the net change for Anza would be negative 235. Yes?
So what you're doing here is you're taking all the kids on the east side and you're bringing them over to the main campus. So that when they go to high school, they're going to be going to high school here at the main campus. But why do that when they go across the street to Walden Grove? You're creating so much traffic.
Yep, and I will tell you right now, that's one of the things that the committee is wrestling with. And again, this is a recommendation because with this slide and the next slide, there are positives and there are negatives of both.
So why not just take the new community that's being built and have them go to the main campus instead of on-site and leave these communities where they are, because it makes more sense for everyone. It makes more sense for people trying to get to work. It makes more sense for the bus schedule.
And what would that plan entail? I didn't quite catch it. You would move who to where?
The new community, they would go to the main campus because that's not going to create.
Well, we do have that recommendation, but the problem is you're not pulling anybody out of Anza because these next two slides are purely about alleviating Anza.
130 kids, and imagine how much traffic you're going to create.
Mm-hmm. Well, certainly there'll be more traffic, and that's one of the things of the committee. And I will talk about class size and what the impact it does to Anza, because when we say, well, what's 235? That's nothing, or what's 120? So I'm gonna answer that in terms of what does it do to Anza, and that's part of the process because I can tell you people in the red neighborhood probably are not going to like this, and I can tell you the next slide, which is Presidio del Cielo, probably won't like it either, and there's other implications with that as well. So let me keep going on and I'll answer some of that class size, but you're exactly right. You're bringing up some of the issues that our committee was talking about. And because of that middle of Rancho Cerrito and you'd be pulling more kids out of Copperview, the committee feels the only thing you can do if you're going to alleviate Anza is looking at these two neighborhoods. You trying to get the kids furthest away from...
But Presidio is still a better option because it doesn't affect everybody else who lives out there.
Mm-hmm, sure. Yeah.
So now you're going to pick buses in to Anza and bus Presidio del Cielo. So now you're adding many more buses and.
That's already happening, but it takes a look at the.
Yeah, let me continue with the presentation, then we can talk about that in a little bit. Because I think everyone will have, there's so many moving pieces to this that I think it's very difficult to do that. And I would encourage you there at the end to ask the questions as well. And if questions come up, certainly ask questions as I present them. But I think the most important thing is going to be in that feedback that I'm going to give at the very end about some of your thoughts. And many people have done that. And like I said, with both of these neighborhoods, even just yesterday when we had our committee boundary was on the wall, the committee can testify, we had the positive and negatives about both. And ultimately the board is going to have to decide what they want to do. Are they going to alleviate Anza and not do anything? Or are they going to pick one of these neighborhoods? But the committee does firmly believe if you're going to pick any neighborhood, it would probably have to be one of these two. And there are positive and negatives about both. So with that, I will talk about the positive and negatives of this. And you mentioned a good thing about buses is these kids in the red would be bused over to the main campus. And then you have the buses that are right north of the school would bus high school kids out to Walden Grove. So you have buses doing this. So that's certainly a... Sure.
You're going to have 16-year-olds trying to cross the house.
Absolutely. And if you ever sit in the front of Walden Grove High School and look at the traffic going into Walden Grove High School, because I personally sat out there and count cars making illegal turns, it's crazy now. So And I appreciate your points. It's absolutely good points. The next neighborhood that we looked at was the Presidio del Cielo. You can see the net change at the main campus. This affects 211 K-8th graders, and it would affect 76 high school kids that live in that neighborhood who would currently go to Walden Grove High School that would go to the main campus. The issues of the committee, positive, negatives about this is currently this neighborhood, at least high school, is already bused. K-8 is not bused here because this is a walking neighborhood to Anza. So if the board was to select this, or if the committee was to recommend this one, then you're going to need more buses and bus drivers. I know when we first opened up Walden Grove, a lot of these people were actually disappointed because they said, I can look at Sarita High School in my backyard right now. Why are you going to put me off to Walden Grove High School? And now people are comfortable and familiar with Walden Grove because it's a great school. And so now we're kind of hearing the thing of don't move us. So again, positive and negatives to both. Traffic concerns with the first one here. The concern here is you're going to need a couple more buses if this was not to remain a walking neighborhood. I can't speak for the current board, but I know the past board has always said we didn't want the main campus to be a walking school because you have kids walking down Sarita Boulevard and La Villita onto the main campus, and they didn't feel that was safe. Another thing in the past, that Presidio del Cielo at one time had some bridges that were going to cross and come into the main campus, and our board was very adamant at the time, and this was many, many years ago, not the current board, was very hesitant about that because of the safety concerns of 200 kids walking across a bus loop road that has 22 buses that move up and down. And if you have a kindergarten student who lives on the east side that needs to walk all the way over to the primary school, or a high school student who lives on the east side right near Fry's has to walk all the way over to the high school, you're going to have a bunch of kids walking up and down the bus loop road. So that at that time wasn't an option for them. So again, one thing to consider is, do you do this neighborhood? You're going to need more buses. Is it going to remain a walking neighborhood? Again, things to consider, positive and negatives of both aspects. I'm not going to go through this too much in detail because this is just my HR page. Again, the staffing that would need, but at least probably the most important thing to look at tonight is what it does with the current numbers. So the left-hand side is if you move the Sarita Heights neighborhood back to the main campus, so you move the 683 off of the main campus, you move Sarita Heights back onto the main campus, and Presidio del Cielo. So you can see on Sarita Heights, the main campus, SPS would go to 539, 534, and 622 at the middle school. And that brings Anza down to 1091. Anza is projected for 1322 for next year. And if you move the Presidio del Cielo, you'd have 517, 533, 621, and Anza would be at 1115. One thing that I did want to talk about, and again, this is kind of talking about the turnover and the flux at Anza. A lot of comments came on was, well, if you don't do anything at Anza, and I'm not trying to push any particular, I'm just trying to present facts, so I'm not trying to argue anyway. But what I did is I ran the numbers, and right now, for Anza Trail School, right now it would be 1378 students. If you move all those students up 1 year for next year, and you were to repeat in kindergarten, so you can see you have 108 in kindergarten and 108 in first grade. Because one of the arguments was, well, Anza will take care of itself. And it might to a certain extent. Because the argument was, or the depiction was, you're losing so many 8th graders and you're not going to get as many kindergarten. Well, again, you don't know as many kindergarten. And that is true, because if you're losing 247 8th graders and you're only gaining 108 kindergarten kids, you have a difference of 130 kids. That's quite a few numbers. But what that argument didn't take into account is, you see in the bottom there, Copperview feeds into Anza Trail School in 6th grade. So you have 83 students who come over from Copperview that add into the school's population. So I predict that if you did nothing, Anza's population would go from 1378 to 1322. So you'd only have a negative loss of 56 students. And again, you don't really know what happens in kindergarten. That also doesn't take into account at Copperview Elementary School in 5th grade, you have 26 students who are open enrollment there. So are they expecting to be open enrollment and move with all of their friends into 6th grade? That's a question that they'll have to answer themselves to apply for open enrollment. And one thing that Mrs. Robinson will have to do is determine if she has the space or not. Talking about open enrollment in general, is even if you took the 56 drop here, and we have 80 students who are on regular open enrollment at Anza Trail School. If you were to take those 80 students and the 56 that you would just normally lose because it's a new year, you'd have 130 students. Talking about class size, if you have 130 students and you have 9 grade levels, you're talking about 14 kids per grade level. You're not really getting a classroom back. And in fact, if you have 4 or 5 teachers per grade level, you're talking about losing 3 or 4 kids per classroom. So you're reducing classroom size, but you're not really getting any space back. You need to lose at least 20 kids per grade level to get a classroom back. And you move some of those specialist teachers, either the L teachers or the SPED teachers, out of those workrooms and back into a regular classroom. So if you're not talking about alleviating Anza by at least 200 students, everything else is just reducing class size. And I'm not trying to say to do something or not, just merely presenting facts of the situation that's in front of us. The new school, just going back to the new school, because we'd be taking kids off of the main campus and putting them into the new school, we would maintain the feeder pattern and not change the enrollment into those schools. So the new school would feed into Sarita High School. And I think the most important thing is that all of these topics are independent of each other. We have, what do we do for the new school? What do we do with the new neighborhoods, right? The Entrada La Vita and Entrada del Rio, where are we going to put them? Again, we're talking the main campus, we're suggesting that. And then what do we do to alleviate Anza, if anything? And we suggest you have to look at 2 neighborhoods because of the reasons I said before, either Presidio del Cielo, which moves 211 students and affects 76 high school students, or Sarita Heights, 235 and 104. Our committee did talk about a little bit of thinking outside the box about if you were to move one of those neighborhoods, they could be on a main campus track, and then when they reach 9th grade, they could still go to Walden Grove High School, so you wouldn't changing the Walden Grove High School boundary. In speaking with administration, that's not endorsed too much at the administration level, but that did come up. I will tell you, because I told the committee I would say this, of these 2 neighborhoods, the committee right now is currently favoring recommending the Sarita Heights neighborhood. And again, we still have to listen to feedback and what the community says. But again, it's not all or nothing. It's the board can just do the new school, they can look at the new boundaries, and they can decide what they want to do at Anza, if anything. And to conclude, and I'll answer questions in just a moment, here's our website, and to give us feedback, because we could go back and forth about options. I can answer factual questions tonight, and I can answer, well, would this happen or would this not happen? I can answer that. But on this, on our website right there, it says 2017 Boundary Realignment. This presentation is going to be on there as well, if it's not already, because Amber is fabulous. And also on the bottom of that page is where you can submit feedback. And about every 4 days or 5 days, I ask Amber to accumulate all of those inputs, and I email them out to the entire committee. So the committee sees every single one that is submitted. So with that, that's the end of my presentation and kind of where our boundary process is now. Again, nothing is finalized at all. The governing board does that. So I'd be happy to answer any factual questions that you have right now and tell you if we thought about other things or, yes, ma'am.
Good evening, Mr. Down.
Good evening, Ms. Sisk.
First, I want to say, I've been following this issue very closely, and I feel like you guys as a committee have done a really good job of keeping us informed and trying to make wise choices for everybody involved. But
Thank you.
My greatest concern with sort of where you're at tonight is speaking about the Sarita Heights issue. And one of the guiding principles you don't have on there is student safety. And the fact of the matter is, high school students, especially high school athletic students, leave early in the morning, come home late at night, this time of night when they're getting out of practice at 6:30 at night, if they're varsity athletes and it's dark. We already had a man hit on that road earlier this, week or so ago, earlier this month. Like, that is a huge concern and an issue. And yes, I get that maybe Anza is not in an ideal situation right now because you're utilizing workspace for special ed type classes and resource teachers and those kind of things. But is eliminating, giving a teacher a workroom back worth the risk to his students in an accident or something like that?
down the road.
Yeah, and to answer that, I think it's very difficult to answer that. One, I can't speak for the committee. Two, I think in anything we do, we always, in doing this process, and our committee talked about this many times, is you're always looking into the crystal ball. How fast do you grow? What's going to happen? What's going to happen with traffic? What are people going to do to not get into that traffic? So, I mean, you bring up many good points, and our committee has talked about all those things. And safety wasn't necessarily on there, but our committee has talked about some of the safety factors in this process as well. So. Let me answer one question from Facebook. This comes from Maria. Will we be able to open enroll to keep our children in their current schools? I can tell you our current open enrollment practice is if there's room, the principal will say yes. At the beginning of every school year, the school board or the principals have to define how much open enrollment capacity that they have, and then they kind of have to live within those parameters, because we could open enroll every student, but then we just have to hire more teachers, and so it's kind of a balancing act. So the answer is yes, you will be able to apply. I can't guarantee that it will be accepted, because again, we're going through the project and the process, and everyone stayed at the school that they came from, then maybe no kids would be going to a new school. And so it's kind of a difficult process. But to answer that, yes, you will be able to apply. Can't guarantee that it will be approved. Yes?
And so speaking about open enrollment, how do you guys face open enrollment? Like, is it a budget? Is it students? Is it what?
It has nothing to do with budget. It has to do with capacity. Basically, if for example, like at Anza, a first grade student might get approved and a third grade student may not, because we actually have some space. Now, we don't have a certain number, like, okay, we always cap class sizes at 24, but looking at the nature of the class, the kids that are in it, the experience of the teacher, we like to make parents happy. And if we can take an open enrollment student, the principal says yes. If we don't have capacity and we're going to have to start hiring more staff, then that's usually when the principal says no.
And another question, you didn't mention anything about moving people to Stoughton. And I know that there's a lot of room over there. Why students are not, moving there if there's already.
Yeah, I can answer that question. What the committee had said when we were looking at that bottom red triangle underneath Walmart, south of Walmart, there's 120 students that we are going to have potentially go down there and recommend that. We heard a lot of people from the community. One of the major aspects that came up was, although that fills SOPRI up a little bit, if your student wakes up late, it's not a 10-minute ride or 15-minute ride to school to drop them off. You have to drive down to SOPRI, which is 20 minutes. You have to drive back to Sarita, which is 40 minutes. Now, if you work in Tucson, it's another 20 minutes, so that puts you an hour behind. Also, if you just have to pick up your student because of a doctor's appointment and you work in Sarita, you have a 40-minute round trip to go pick up your student and then come back. Another reason was the safety of students. Although I had showed a slide at the last public forum that had articulated it's not too much of a different time on the bus, but the nature of how those kids spend the time on the bus was different. If you were to go from North Rancho Street and go to Copperview, it was about 35 minutes because they stop every 100 yards and kids get on the bus and they eventually get there. The committee thought going to SOPRI, well, you're just as much time on the bus, but that's all freeway. There's different types of elements on the freeway, and that's why the committee decided to drop that notion.
But if the kids try it.
Sorry, say it again?
If the kids go there, they do they use the freeway. So I don't know why it's okay for the kids to be.
Well, I think we didn't talk about that, but just my reaction to that is the gifted kids go down there once a week, and these kids will be doing that 5 times, so the probability is they have a 4 more times chance to possibly get hurt. I mean, we don't have many buses that crash, but that's kind of what the committee had said was having them on the freeway so much. And if we can eliminate that, why not? Talking about the safety concern that Mrs. Sisk was talking about. Yes?
I would like to address from the committee's perspective.
Yes, here's one of our committee members. So,
Hi, Lauren and Stacy. From the committee's perspective, in regards to Sarita Heights and the kids going to high school, we have looked at what we're calling the out of the box option, in which the kids from Sarita Heights would go to the main campus for K through 8, and then 9 to 12 would go to Walmart High School.
But then they're not pulling in their friends, they're kind of the same age. And that's why a lot of us come to Saudita, because it is a close community. Like, we moved out of Tucson to come to Saudita so that our kids can grow up and have the same friends that are out there.
And we talked about that as well, and we've had, anecdotal evidence from the people on the committee whose kids went through that same thing, went through the main campus path, 8th grade, and then went to Walden for high school. And they remained friends in the community with kids.
But like, so why do that?
And they are still in, going to high school with kids in their neighborhood, which was one of our guidance.
But it's not the kids that were in their classroom, and now they're, right, instead of being on the same team, they're on the team. You get what I'm saying? Like, why do it when you don't have to? Why make this change when it's not gonna affect the school that much?
Well, and I think you bring up a good point that everyone has a different perspective in what's important to them, because I think some people would argue we should move kids because we want to alleviate ANZA. And to go on to that thought, I have a question from Lou from Facebook.
Facebook can't hear the questions.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry, Facebook, if you're still listening. When we get questions from the audience, I'll repeat the question. Here's from Lou from Facebook. It says, a new K-8 and the need to alleviate ANZA. Then why are we changing the boundaries for high school students? Traditionally, we've kept kids on the same track. So if you're moving K-8 in this neighborhood and you're changing them to the main campus, by nature, you're changing the high school component of that as well. The committee did bring up, and I mentioned that a little bit before, was thinking outside the box, was if you do not change the high school, and again, we can talk about do we change the high school or not. If you change that neighborhood for K-8 and you don't change it for high school, what you're doing is saying, okay, you're gonna come to the main campus for kindergarten through 8th grade. But then when you get to 8th grade, everyone's gonna get promoted to high school, and half of you guys are gonna continue on the main campus, and if we don't change those other students that would now not be Cerrito High School, they would go off to Walden Grove. And there's arguments for and against that as well. And there's arguments that it's not a big deal because kids are resilient and more at high school. There's some is you've built relationship for 9 years of kindergarten through 8th grade. Now you're gonna be promoted and everybody gets split up. So again, something that the board has to consider. Yes?
This is just my experience, having my 40s, I grew up in a small community, and that's what happened. After we went through 9th grade, that half of the kids went to a high school on one side of the street, the other half went on the other side, and I'll tell you what, I thought it was great, we all liked it. So we played each other's teams and everything, but we had friends at the other high school, and we were the only school that had that, and I think we all thought it was kind of cool. And honestly, I'm friends with people from both high schools still to this day. So I grew up that way, and it wasn't that big of a deal. We just knew that we would split, and we thought it was kind of cool. I mean, I don't know. We made new friends, but we had some of the same friends.
Yep.
It was,
Again, arguments on both sides of the camp, and what's the right thing to do? I don't know. I'm glad I'm not a school board member. Yes, sir.
Two questions. One is, it seems to me that the schools are all sort of concentrated right on Sully Road. I understand you've got a lot of students in Rancho, but in the outlying areas, there's a lot of students as well. Why do they keep building schools all within a stone's throw of each other? My second question is, has it ever been considered to go to a year-round school system rather than the traditional? Whereas with the year-round, you've got 4 classroom tracks. One of those 4 tracks is always off. So you've got 3 classrooms, so there's never more than 3 tracks at one time. But that could be an option.
Yeah, I'll answer both of those questions one at a time for our Facebook friends. The first question was, why do we build all the schools together, basically? To answer that question, basically, myself and our school architect that we hired, we did a land study of all the land that was available. There are 3 major landholders in our area. One's FICO, one's Rancho Cerrito, and the other ones are the mines, and also state land. We looked at each one of those options. State land usually takes about 2 years to acquire, and you usually have to rent it. The other land that we looked at was land that was donated. With each one of those spots, it has its positives and its negatives. You have to look at the cost of infrastructure to those. If we put a school out in the middle of nowhere, we have to build the infrastructure to it, like Walden Grove High School. So in this particular case, we had an arrangement with Rancho Cerrito that they donated the land, and we were going to split the cost of the road to get there. It was mutual beneficial. So that's kind of why you're kind of prisoner to what land you can get at that time. Certainly, it is my wish that we start expanding, because we always talk about neighborhood schools, and so it'd be nice to put schools where people are. So I know that's kind of our focus. Your second question was if we thought about a year-round school. That's come up many times, and we've done public input and feedback on our website. And currently, we haven't heard enough feedback in the positive realm to do that, which certainly doesn't mean we can't look at that in the future. But tell me if I'm wrong, Mr. Bonner, but I think that's come up probably twice. And each time we've kind of researched it, and it didn't really go anywhere because there wasn't enough momentum behind it. But certainly we can always look at it again. We're always looking for all options. This comes from Lisa on Facebook. Do you have funding for the buses needed for Presidio Cielo? That's an interesting question. Right now we have a override that you can buy buses, you can buy certain things. If we needed buses for that neighborhood, certainly we could arrange it. Again, you only have so much money, so if you're buying buses, you may not buy something else. So again, that's a cost trade-off, but if the board was decided they wanted to do Rancho Cielo, then certainly we could get the money and make that a priority to get the buses. So it's not a matter that we don't have the money, it's a matter of prioritizing the money that we have and what do we want to do with it. That was a good question. Yes, sir.
Mr. Jones, public board members that are here. My name is John Cook, I'm the principal at Freedom High School. And I have spoken extensively with Teresa Hill, who's the principal at Walnut High School. And neither of us are in favor of option 2 moving the Cerrito Heights kids. For several reasons. There's a demographic difference between the kids that go to Cerrito High School and the kids that go to Walnut. Basically, 75% approximately of Rancho Cerrito attend Golden Grove, and about 25% of those kids come to Cerrito High School. And then we have kids from Ranch, from Motto, from all of the outlying communities. And moving those Cerrito Heights kids to Cerrito High School removes the demographics of Cerrito High School and Walnut Grove High School. It goes against one of the fundamental principles of the committee in terms of creating or maintaining schools that are diverse. Well, there's already an appearance of a rich school, poor school in Cerrito High School. And Cerrito High School is the poor school from the public perception. Walnut Grove High School is the rich school. And moving those Cerrito Heights kids to Cerrito High School makes that divide there. I have 3 kids at Onza Trail, and I'm all for reducing class size. But not only does that Cerrito Heights move change the diversity at the high schools, it changes the diversity of Onza Trail, because guess what? Those Cerrito Heights kids are the diversity in large part at Onza Trail. And something that no one has talked about is open enrollment. All these boundaries, nothing is going to change unless there's a deliberate discussion about open enrollment and how our schools are going to address it. Because there are 150 kids in Onza Trail right now that are open enrolled. And we're going to change the diversity of multiple campuses to move to free up, what is it, 120 seats at Onza Trail, moving the Cerrito Heights kids?
235.
So, I mean, I want my kids to have, I want my children to go to a diverse. I want my kids to go to a school also that doesn't have giant classrooms, but I just want to make sure that, to go on record, that this is going to change, the Cerrito Heights proposal will change the diversity of what multiple schools look like in our district. And I don't think it's a good thing for schools. I feel confident.
And I appreciate that comment in this discussion, because we're kind of regurgitating everything that we did as a committee, because we've had all these discussions. And one of the things I talked about when I talked about all of our guiding principles was you address one and you might be compromising another. And where's that happy medium? It's very difficult to figure out what's the right thing to do, because you're affecting children's lives.
And I also want to go over and say that whatever kids that we get at Cerrito High School, we're going to take care of. But I also think it's important to mention how that is going to affect Cerrito High School and Golden Grove High School in terms of how we're graded and standardized testing. It's going to have a big impact on the 2 high schools, and it's going to make a difference. It's going to make the high schools, it's going to make a big difference in what both high schools look like. Mrs. Hill and I have worked hard to change the climate in Sarita in terms of, there was an unhealthy rivalry 5 years ago between the two high schools, and it's not like that. And I think that this proposal of Little Sarita Heights would have a negative effect.
And I just want to reiterate, if you're joining us on Facebook and could not hear that, that was Principal John Canoy basically talking about if you were to change the Sarita Heights neighborhood, you would greatly impact the diversity that happens at both of the high schools. So I just want to make sure that people could hear that on Facebook. Yes, sir.
Hi, I'm Chris Keeley. I want to talk about the public safety aspect for moving Sarita Highlands 9 through 12. All students to leave Sarita Highlands will make campus will have to cross a 4-lane highway, go across railroad tracks that are active with a warning local, and through free pasture going afraid when the applicant hasn't. Children have a higher rate of fatalities at grade crossings, and there's heavy machinery for agricultural equipment. That's just for the kids that go from east to west to go to Sarita High School. The kids in Presidio
Cielo.
Cielo, thank you. We'll have to make the same move, but in reverse, across 4 lanes of highway. You have the beginning drivers being taxed to the max to go across campuses for convenience. If they don't do that, they make right-hand turn to the left-hand turn. They reduce their public safety factor. I was curious if the board had taken that up as the actual maneuvers that you're going to have high school students that are just learning to drive, probably one of the most dangerous stretch of highway with at least one fatality in the last month.
If you're one of our Facebook friends, basically he's talking about the movement of cars and crossing of a 4-lane road and railroad tracks if you were to talk about one of these neighborhoods. So I appreciate you bringing that up. I can't say we talked as a committee about how many right turns and left turns that you make. We did talk about generally movement of students. And just to clarify, I want everyone to know that's listening with us today and on Facebook that the school board has not had a discussion on this yet. It's merely a committee. So I didn't want anybody to get the impression that the school board has already made a decision or endorsing any of these ideas yet. And I appreciate the 3 board members that are here because they're getting some good feedback that they're hearing now, but it hasn't gone to the school board yet. So. Is there any more questions? Yes, in orange.
So looking at the 2 subdivisions, Yellow and Sarita Heights, financially with the budget, it would cost more for CLO because you have to get more buses and things like that to provide the bus transportation and maintenance and driver costs and all that.
That is correct. The question, as you read on Facebook, is if you were to choose the Rancho Presidio del Cielo, because that neighborhood is a K-8 walking school to Anza right now, if you made them main campus, and if the board chose that they didn't want that to be a walking school, then yes, we would need to afford approximately 3 buses and bus drivers.
You're saying if the board chooses not to make it a walking school, are you considering making Presidio del Cielo walking? The gas station and all those restaurants that are going in, they're going to be walking, all those kindergarten kids are going to be walking right in?
I can't answer for the current board, but I can say for the past board that they've always had the philosophy of not having the main campus a walking school for all the reasons that you just articulated. So that has been the historical trend and the thought process of that. Again, I can't speak for the current board yet. But yes, those are concerns if you were to make that if it was a walking neighborhood. And that's another good point too, is when you talk about Entrada La Villita, we're recommending that to be a main campus. It's right around the corner, and are we gonna bus those kids as well? I mean, literally they're right around the corner, but if the board says this is a non-walking campus, we don't want kindergarten kids making that, we might be sending 1 bus into Entrada La Villita as well. So again, a bunch of little decisions that need to be made. Any other questions? Okay, we have 1 more from Facebook and 1 more from the audience, and I think we're slowing down a little bit. Yes, ma'am.
So is the committee's recommendation the moving of Sarita Heights and the Sarita Highlands to main campus for K through 12? Is that the recommendation?
Yes, to an extent. No recommendation has been made yet. The question for our Facebook friends is the recommendation to move Sarita Heights to the main campus K-12? There hasn't been a recommendation yet because we're still through the process. But the The thought process is right now is to have one of these neighborhoods possibly come to the main campus. Each has its positives and its concerns. The thought is to move K-12. The one outside of the box thinking again has been, do you move that neighborhood but not touch the high school kids? And we kind of talked about that a little bit, is kids would go kindergarten through 8th grade, and then when they graduate or get promoted in 8th grade, then they split off to different high schools. And so again, one thing to talk about. So there's no official recommendation yet. Again, these are just all aspects that we're talking about, the positive and concerns about each one of those.
Is the committee then still going to recommend that the La Cañada area go to the old code industry?
We've pretty much solidified that will be the recommendation. We haven't heard too much feedback on that. The question for Facebook was, is the recommendation for the new school solidified? Yes, I can tell you that the committee has kind of solidified that thought that this is what they're going to recommend to Dr. Valenzuela. And the other two pieces about alleviating ANZA are still up on the table for public feedback, and we'll see what happens. But yes, this is the official recommendation that will be to Dr. Valenzuela. Again, it's not done. If we hear something that changes our mind, we will still have another meeting for the this is from on Facebook from Zenny. Why not make the suggested boundaries effective to new families only? I'm not sure exactly what boundaries that would suggest, but we did have one committee member that said, let's just have all the new neighborhoods being built go to the new school. But then that would mean the school may open with like 15 kids, because you'd gradually fill it up. So I apologize, Zenny, if I don't understand that. If you want to clarify that, I can answer that more specifically. Another one from Facebook is, Jamie, are there no other options? We met yesterday as a committee, and my last question to the committee was, have we thought of everything? Have we turned over every rock? Is there anything that we haven't thought of? And we feel like through that process of looking in the middle of Rancho Cerrita, to looking at boundaries, to looking at numbers, we feel that we've eliminated all the other possible options, and this is the main option for the new school for the 683 students. And again, we haven't solidified our final opinion on the recommendation for ANZA. So there was other options, but we didn't think that they were valid. Ms. Sisk?
But there's a third option on the table, really. Don't move Cielo, don't move Cerrita Heights, leave them both where they're at. And unfortunate as it is, 235 students will stay at ANZA, and you'll continue to use those classrooms, those workrooms as classrooms. It's not ideal, but it's not the worst. And when you're looking at all your guiding principles, including student safety, it seems like that's the best option. And then when you add in, like what Mr. Knoit says, when we consider the diversity, the socioeconomic diversity of both high schools, you also get to maintain that status as well, which is a good thing.
Yes, I appreciate that statement. I can't tell you what the best option is. As a committee leader, I'm merely presenting all the facts and scenarios, but I did say exactly what you said. I said, if the board decides to alleviate ANZA, here's the two possibilities that we would recommend. Again, we're not recommending that. And I said, like I said, when it goes to the board, I have no idea what they're going to do. I haven't had a conversation with the board. Again, this is what's good about this process, is they're hearing all this. So yes, there is technically a third option. All these things are independent of each other. The board can pick one of them, both of them, none of them. So another question from Facebook from Michelle. If we are building a new school, why would ANZA go to Maine instead of the new school? Let me get my head around that question. If we're building a new school, why would ANZA go to the main school instead? I think that could possibly be an option. I can't tell committee members, we might have talked about that option. I think, again, talking about neighborhood schools, we took all of those neighborhoods around La Cañada and put them in the new school. I think what this question is recommending is make that little yellow area that's on the screen a little bit smaller and put some ANZA kids into that neighborhood. Certainly that's a possibility, sure. Yes.
So for the schools that are currently stressed with the capacity issues, what's in place now to help alleviate that? Do any of the schools use portable classrooms or temporary buildings?
Yes, I would say right now our biggest concern, not only ANZA being in some workrooms, but at the middle school, we have probably half of our staff who who are teaching 6/5. That means they get a little bit extra money and they teach on their planning period, so it reduces that class size. So I think we're dealing with that issue at the middle school in that capacity. And at the other schools, we are in some portables, and thank you to the community, can't say thank you enough. As soon as this new school is built, we'll be tearing down those portables and putting in permanent classrooms. So there are in portables, and I would say the class sizes are okay right now at SPS and SIS, and I think opening up the new school, we're kind of getting ahead of the next development that's occurring now. Yes?
I have a question about the open enrollment issue. This is the same as our option. Mr. Canoy said there's 150 open enrollment kids in Asa. If we're 70, actually, 170. And we're talking about moving 200 kids either from Serena High School to do it as the yellow. Why not close open enrollment on Anza and not wait to keep the neighborhoods both going to Anza on the track of and just close open enrollment?
Okay, yeah. One, I can say I don't know what numbers those numbers come from. The numbers that I got from On the Trail School is 132 kids were open enrollment. 80 of those are regular open enrollment. 50 of those students are staff kids. We can't pay teachers enough money, so the only benefit we probably give to our teachers is if you work at ONSA, you can bring your kid there. So 50 of those kids are staff kids, 80 of those kids, or 82 of those kids are open enrollment. Mrs. Robinson, principal, is here. Do you want to talk about that a little bit? It's a good question.
And it's something that we provide in every school, even though it's better not to have we have the same percentage of open enrollment to our total student population as Serena High School. The highest open enrollment school per percentage to their overall open enrollment is Cottonview. So there's not one site in our district that doesn't have open enrollment. And there are a lot of guidelines that go with this. The average better, good attendance, minimal to no tardies, as well as overall good behavior. And it is an application process that you do have to apply year after year. And I am the fourth principal at Onset Trail, and that school goes K-9. So the students in good standing, I have no reason to turn them down for the following year for, the prior principal okaying that. And then something we visit every year, and every year there are some people who are denied that lost their standing. So it is something that we consider heavily. It is something District 5 that we would need to revisit. But for me, a large portion are staff students. So for me to say, no, you can't, if you're a non staff member or Serena Unified School District staff member, come on enrollment, it seems like an unfair restriction on Onset Trail specifically and not shared with all the other schools.
And what do you feel about all of this? Like, what are your thoughts on
What are my thoughts?
For our Facebook friends, if you can't hear, somebody asked Mrs. Robinson, who's the principal of Onset Trail School, how she feels about all of this.
It is, I'm not a community, and it's something that weighs your heart every single day. And I have told my students to just have my life as an educator. We keep kids safe first, and then keep them learning second, regardless of how many rules that you have. So even though safety was an academy principle, it is the underlying heartbeat of what we do. So that is definitely something heavy. As far as the guiding principle of diverse schools, I was the one that proposed that guiding principle. So I'm with you 100%. As far as wanting diversity in all schools, I truly feel we learn best by other people, those that we are surrounded by, and there's so much to learn from everybody, regardless of their unique gifts. Do I want to lose any student? Absolutely not, and I don't know any staff member that does. But I'm also supposed to be the leader of and represent everyone under my care. That includes students, staff members, and parents. And when you do, I know it sounds like, wow, you're getting rid of work rate. That doesn't seem like enough of a need to cause so much, disheartening feelings and anxiety that comes with my child's going to be in high schools or my child's going to be on a different track. It's really hard when you have 120 staff members and they share one bathroom. And right now, there's a stall identified in each building that used to have a workroom that now is a classroom. That is the adult bathroom that is in the same area as the kids. So, we all as adults also need various foods, right? And you need a little bit of that kind of time. And you don't really get it. So I have to look at the well-being of them. So for me, as much as I want to say for me personally as Darwin Robbins, as an educator, mom, wife, that I don't want to lose any child out of my school, I also have to think of the 120 other staff members. Will that be okay either way in our staff? Absolutely. Educators know how to do very, monumental stuff, but very little resources. So we're going to be good and it's going to be great. But if there's a possibility for us to mitigate ONSA, it's worth having this discussion. Again, as a committee member, we don't solidify the final plan that goes to our governing board, but it's worth having that conversation and reading it and considering it at every single angle, because we would be remiss if we didn't follow through with that process. And I know it's hard. I am a parent, I have 2 high schoolers. The whole AIA thing would be an issue for me as well. They know the commute. It's hard to see walking students now needing to be bused. There is a lose-lose situation in either one. But at the same time, I have to advocate for everyone I represent, and that is why it warrants giving this time for discussion.
I have one more question. I know we could go on and on about opinions and thoughts, and that's why it's important. The very last slide that we have is you can continue to give feedback, whether you're our Facebook friend or you're here live today, about submitting those ideas and thoughts. So I'm going to answer one more question from Facebook, not only because it's the last one, but it's a good one. This comes from Michelle. It says, do kids have to move if they will be in 8th grade, I'm assuming next year, or can they finish where they are? It's a good question because we have done that in the past. And so I'll say with any rule, there's an exception to the rule. So I can say that's an option and we haven't answered that yet. And the reason I don't think we've answered it yet is simple. One, I pulled up this slide now for the new school. So if you look at the 86 students, those are 86 students right now, not talking about the ONSA alleviation, but just opening the new school. These are 86 current 7th graders at Sarita Middle School would now be 8th graders at the new school. So we could look at that option, but here's the difficulty in doing that, because again, they've been at ONSA, or they've been at the main campus for a while, they've been at the middle school for 6th and 7th grade. Why can't they just finish off? One, we always have the younger siblings, and do we allow the younger siblings to come? But another important aspect to consider is if you take all of our 6th, 7th, and 8th graders at this new school, so you're looking at about 260, you need to have an effective program when you open up a new school. This is not only academics, but sports. So any sports team that's going to be fielded at this new school, are you going to be able to put a baseball team together? Are you going to be able to put a football team together? Are you going to be able to put a wrestling team together? So now, I'm not saying wrestling is more important than keeping the kids at school. So we'll have to look at that aspect. I think that will be once the committees decide and the boundaries are aligned, we can kind of talk about some of those recommendations that we could give to Dr. Valenzuela if we wanted to certainly do something like that. So those options are on the table, but I can't necessarily say yes or no right now. So I'll do one more because you're here.
And also go for juniors and seniors that are going to be in high school, that have been with these kids for the last 11 years, that are involved in sports at their high school.
I can tell you that Mrs. Hill said every kid, if they have to move from Walden Grove High School, she will open enroll them if they meet the conditions. So without me formally saying anything by protocol, Teresa Hill has said if they meet the conditions, she will open enroll every single kid. So yes, I can answer that for Teresa Hill because she was pretty adamant about not losing any kids. Okay, well, I want to be respectful of your time. It's a little bit after 7, so thank you for joining us, whether it was in person or Facebook. And again, please remember that website if you continue to have thought processes in terms of this new boundary alignment. So thank you and good night.
Okay. somebody say that. I have it. Yeah. I'm also the head legislator. I'm the I'm the one who go down and somebody said, I've seen